Most men never notice the exact moment attraction begins to slip away. They assume it happens because of one wrong word, a poorly timed message, or some small slip-up. But the truth is, attraction usually starts fading long before any obvious mistake shows up. It begins the second a man becomes emotionally dependent on attention. This is one of the biggest truths that almost every man fails to grasp. In the beginning, everything feels natural. A woman gives him attention and he feels great. She texts back fast and his confidence lifts. She shows interest and his whole mood brightens. There's nothing wrong with enjoying that kind of attention. The trouble starts when attention shifts from being a nice bonus to feeling like a necessity. Because once a man needs attention just to feel worthy, his behavior starts shifting without him even realizing it. He grows impatient, he grows anxious, he becomes way too available, he starts over-analyzing situations that don't need it. A late reply suddenly feels like a crisis. A short text feels like rejection. A tiny shift in tone triggers unnecessary worry. And just like that, his actions stop coming from confidence. They start coming from fear. Fear of losing her attention. Fear of being replaced. Fear of not measuring up. Here's the strange part about neediness. It rarely needs words to show itself. People simply feel it. They pick up on it through your behavior. They sense it in how fast you drop your own priorities. They sense it in how badly you chase reassurance. They sense it in how tightly your mood is tied to their response. And that's exactly where attraction starts to break down. Because attraction thrives in freedom, not in dependency. Think about it for a second. When someone senses that your entire happiness rests on them, it creates pressure. Instead of enjoying being around you, they start to feel burdened by your emotional state. And feeling burdened is nowhere close to feeling attracted. Most men assume that showing more interest will fix things, so they push harder, they send more texts, they give more attention, they chase more reassurance. But the harder they chase certainty, the more uncertainty they end up creating, because confidence pulls people in while dependency pushes them away. A man who constantly needs proof that he matters is unknowingly sending a message. He's telling the world he doesn't fully believe in his own worth. Now picture a different kind of man, one who enjoys connection but isn't controlled by it. He appreciates attention but doesn't demand it. He enjoys being close to someone but never loses himself in the process. His life keeps moving forward no matter what happens around him. His goals stay important, his standards stay firm, his confidence stays steady. This creates a completely different kind of energy because his choices come from want, not need. And people naturally respond to that in a different way. Here's the irony. The less a man chases validation, the more genuine he becomes. He stops putting on a performance. He stops trying to engineer outcomes. He stops calculating every move just to hold someone's interest. Instead, he just becomes himself, and being real will always beat being desperate. This is exactly why neediness is one of the quickest ways to kill attraction. It slowly turns confidence into dependence, strength into insecurity, and curiosity into pressure. The moment a man stops relying on attention to feel valuable, he gets back something far more valuable than attraction itself. He gets back control of himself. And once he has that control, he's finally able to build the one quality that truly separates the exceptional men from the average ones. A strong sense of purpose that gives his life meaning that has nothing to do with anyone's approval. One of the biggest myths most men buy into is that attraction is built through words. They believe the perfect message, the perfect compliment, or the perfect conversation will make someone fall for them. So they spend years polishing what they say while totally ignoring what actually shapes how people see them. What they don't realize is that purpose is often far more magnetic than charm, because charm might grab attention, but purpose earns respect. Picture the difference between a man who's constantly chasing approval and a man who's deeply focused on building something that matters. The first man spends most of his energy watching how people react to him. He craves approval. He craves recognition. He craves proof that he's doing things right. The second man operates differently. His focus is locked on a mission. He has goals that push him. He has ambitions that demand discipline. He has responsibilities that require real focus. And because of that, he carries himself in a completely different way. There's a certain kind of confidence that comes from simply knowing where you're headed, not because everything in life is perfect, not because every goal has already been reached, but because having direction brings certainty. A lot of men underestimate just how powerful that is. When a man has no purpose, he tends to fill that empty space with distractions. He becomes fixated on attention. He becomes fixated on approval. He becomes fixated on being liked. His emotions end up tied to things outside his control. But purpose flips that around completely. Purpose gives a man something bigger than validation to chase. It gives him a reason to keep going even when no one's watching, even when no one's praising him, even when no one's choosing him. And that kind of mindset builds real strength. It's simply human nature to notice people who are committed to something meaningful. There's something magnetic about a person who wakes up each day with a clear direction, someone building skills, someone chasing growth, someone becoming better simply because they want more out of their own life. That kind of focus is hard to fake, and because it's real, it naturally becomes attractive. Here's the irony. Many men think attraction comes from making someone else the center of their entire world, but in reality, people are usually drawn to those who already have a world of their own, a mission, a vision, a purpose, something that gives their life real depth. This doesn't mean shutting people out or becoming cold and distant. It means refusing to let someone else's approval become the foundation of who you are. Because when a man has purpose, he becomes less reactive, more disciplined, more patient, and more confident. Not because he's trying to look strong, but because his life actually has direction, and direction brings stability. Without purpose, people drift wherever their emotions take them. With purpose, they keep moving forward no matter what temporary emotions try to pull them off course. That's why purpose beats charm every time. Charm can create a moment. Purpose builds character. Charm can grab attention. Purpose earns respect, and respect tends to outlast attention by a long shot. The strongest men are rarely the ones working hardest to be noticed. Usually they're the ones pouring their energy into becoming someone they can genuinely be proud of. Because once a man develops real purpose, he no longer has to convince anyone of his worth. His actions start speaking for him instead. And once a man becomes fully committed to his mission, another fascinating psychological pattern starts to show up. People begin valuing his attention more, simply because it's no longer handed out to everyone all the time. As a man becomes driven by purpose, something interesting starts happening. His attention naturally becomes more valuable, not because he's trying to manufacture value, but because he's no longer giving it away freely to just anyone. This points to a psychological principle that most men completely misread. Human beings tend to value what's limited far more than what's always within reach. Not because people are selfish and not because they enjoy missing out, but because scarcity naturally sharpens our attention. Think about anything that's always around. You rarely think twice about it. You rarely appreciate it. You just assume it'll always be there. And the second something feels guaranteed, the mind stops paying close attention to its value. The same thing tends to happen with human attention. Most men believe they need to be available at all times to stay important. They think replying instantly, always saying yes, and being endlessly accessible will boost attraction, but very often the exact opposite happens. The more available they make themselves, the more predictable they become. And the more predictable they become, the less curiosity they spark. Curiosity is one of the strongest forces in human psychology. People naturally fixate on what they can't fully predict. They notice change. They notice absence. They notice anything that breaks a familiar pattern. This isn't about playing games. It's about understanding how people actually work. Picture a man whose whole life revolves around getting someone's attention. He's always available, always waiting, always ready to drop everything at a moment's notice. Over time, his attention becomes something expected. And once something becomes expected, people stop seeing it as special. Now picture a man who has goals, responsibilities, and a life full of meaning. He's not always available simply because his life is full of other priorities. He values his time, he values his focus, he values his mission. As a result, his attention becomes intentional instead of unlimited. And that completely changes how it's perceived, because intentional attention feels valuable, while unlimited attention often feels ordinary. This is exactly how many men end up accidentally lowering their own value. They believe that pouring on more and more attention will make someone appreciate them more, but instead, they often destroy the very thing that creates appreciation in the first place, the chance to actually recognize value. Human nature runs on contrast. People value light because darkness exists. They value success because failure exists. They value presence because absence exists. Take away the contrast and awareness fades away with it. Here's the irony. The men who chase attention the hardest usually end up losing it. Meanwhile, the men who pour their energy into building a meaningful life often attract attention without ever chasing it. Why does this happen? Because people are drawn to those who seem to have a sense of direction. People notice men whose lives don't revolve around getting approval. People notice men who are comfortable putting their energy into their own growth. And here's the thing, when someone is truly focused on growing, they naturally become a little less available. Not on purpose, not as a strategy, just naturally. That creates mystery. It sparks curiosity. It raises questions, and questions hold people's interest far longer than predictability ever could. Most men spend years trying to boost their value through words, looks, or non-stop effort. But one of the most powerful psychological truths is much simpler than that. Value tends to rise when something isn't endlessly available. And the moment a man grasps this, he starts treating his attention like something worth guarding instead of something he hands out freely. Because once a man learns to value his own time and energy, he unlocks an even rarer trait, boundaries strong enough to earn respect long before attraction even has a chance to grow. Once a man understands what his time, attention, and energy are really worth, he arrives at a crucial fork in the road. Will he keep letting others decide his limits for him, or will he finally start setting those limits himself? This is exactly where boundaries come into play, and boundaries happen to be one of the most misunderstood ideas in relationships today. Most men hear the word boundary and picture distance, coldness, or a fight. They assume that having standards will drive people away, so they avoid saying no. They avoid stating what they expect. They avoid protecting their time and their emotional energy. They convince themselves that being endlessly accommodating will make them more likable. But what actually happens is the complete opposite. When someone has no boundaries, they unknowingly send a message that their standards are up for negotiation. Their time is negotiable. Their values are negotiable. Everything becomes flexible, and human nature picks up on this immediately. People might appreciate kindness, but they rarely respect someone who keeps abandoning their own needs just to keep everyone else happy. Think about how many men put up with things that make them uncomfortable, all because they're scared of losing someone's approval. They stay quiet when they should speak up. They ignore their gut instincts when they should trust them. They put up with treatment they know isn't healthy simply because they're afraid that setting a boundary might spark conflict. Here's the problem. Every time this happens, they send themselves a quiet message. They tell themselves that holding on to someone else's attention matters more than protecting their own self-respect. And over time, that mindset turns destructive because self-respect can't grow in a place where boundaries don't exist. Strong boundaries were never about controlling other people. They're about controlling what you allow into your own life. They reflect how much you value yourself. When a man has healthy boundaries, he doesn't feel the need to argue constantly. He doesn't need to threaten anyone. He doesn't need to force people to act a certain way. He simply knows what fits his values and what doesn't. And when something keeps violating those values, he's willing to step back. That willingness is where real strength comes from, because boundaries only mean something when they're actually enforced. Plenty of people can talk about their standards. Very few are willing to hold the line when it gets uncomfortable. This is exactly why boundaries reveal so much about character. They show whether someone genuinely respects themselves or just talks about self-respect without living it. People naturally test limits, and not always on purpose. Sometimes they're simply watching to see what behavior gets accepted, what gets tolerated, and what actually carries consequences. When a man has no boundaries, he's teaching people that almost anything goes. When a man has strong boundaries, he's teaching people that respect is the baseline, and that respect changes the entire dynamic of every interaction. Here's the truth: attraction without respect rarely survives, but respect built on a foundation of self-respect creates something far sturdier. People gravitate toward those who know their own worth and protect it, not because those people are flawless, but because they show consistency. Their actions line up with their standards. Their words match their behavior. That kind of integrity stands out, because in a world where so many people bend themselves out of shape just to avoid rejection, the person who stays loyal to their own values gets noticed instantly. And once a man finds the courage to hold his boundaries without fearing the loss of approval, he uncovers the final lesson that most people spend their whole lives running from. The realization that real power belongs to whoever is willing to walk away rather than sacrifice their own self-respect. As a man builds stronger boundaries, he starts to notice something most people never figure out. Boundaries by themselves aren't enough. Standards by themselves aren't enough. Self-respect by itself isn't enough either. Because sooner or later, life throws a test his way, a moment where he has to choose between sticking to his standards or clinging to someone's approval. And this is exactly where most men stumble. Not because they're weak, but because they're afraid. Afraid of losing someone. Afraid of rejection. Afraid of being left alone. Afraid that if they stand firm, the relationship, the connection, or the opportunity might vanish. So they give in. At first, it feels small and harmless. They let behavior slide that actually bothers them. They make excuses for actions they know are wrong. They accept treatment they'd never tell a friend to put up with, all because they're scared of what might happen if they walk away. But here's the catch: every compromise comes with a hidden price tag. That price is self-respect. And self-respect is incredibly hard to rebuild once it's been chipped away over and over again. Think about how many people stay stuck in situations that drain them completely simply because they're afraid of starting over. They put up with disrespect because loneliness scares them. They put up with inconsistency because they're afraid of losing attention. They put up with unhealthy patterns because uncertainty terrifies them. But there's something crucial they're missing. The fear of losing someone is often far more damaging than actually losing them. Because fear changes how a person behaves. Fear makes people needy. Fear makes people desperate. Fear makes people abandon everything they stand for. And once fear takes the wheel, they stop acting like themselves. Instead, they start acting like someone who will do anything to avoid loss. That's exactly why one of the most magnetic qualities a man can develop is the willingness to lose whatever isn't right for him. Notice the difference here. Not wanting to lose someone, that's completely normal. But being willing to lose someone if it means protecting your self-respect, that's real power. The two are worlds apart. One comes from fear. The other comes from genuine strength. Human nature naturally respects people who stand by their principles even when it costs them something. Why? Because it shows conviction. It shows emotional independence. It shows that their choices come from their values, not from desperation. Most men believe attraction is built by convincing someone to stay. But real respect usually comes from knowing you'll be fine even if they walk away. That kind of confidence can't be faked. It comes from understanding that your identity is bigger than any one person. It comes from knowing your future doesn't hinge on someone else's decision. It comes from knowing your worth stays intact, no matter who chooses you and who doesn't. This mindset changes everything, because once a man stops fearing loss, he stops chasing, he stops begging, he stops trying to prove himself, he stops negotiating his own worth, and suddenly his whole presence feels different, calmer, stronger, more real, not because he's putting on an act of power, but because he's no longer being run by the same fear that controls most people. And here's the final irony. So many men spend years trying to become more attractive while quietly living in fear of rejection the entire time. Yet the moment they become willing to walk away from anything that doesn't match their standards, they gain something far more valuable than attraction ever was. They gain a sense of freedom, and that freedom builds a presence that no one can fake, because it comes from a man who has finally realized that his own self-respect matters more than anyone else's short-lived approval. Once he reaches that freedom, the last lesson becomes obvious. The men who earn the deepest respect aren't the ones chasing attention. They're the ones who feel completely at ease walking their own road, whether people are watching or not. Everything we've covered points to one final truth, a truth that most men spend years running from, because facing it means confronting their biggest fear, the fear of losing someone. For most people, this fear shapes their choices more than they even realize. It shapes what they say. It shapes what they put up with. It shapes how they act. They might not admit it out loud, but deep down, many of their choices come from a hidden need to avoid loss. They hold their tongue when they should speak up. They settle for less than their worth. They chase after someone when they should be pulling back. They lower their standards when they should be guarding them. And all of it comes from one fear, the fear of being left behind. But here's the twist. The men who fear losing someone the most often end up losing themselves instead, and losing yourself is a far bigger danger than losing another person. Think about it this way. What happens when a man's happiness rests entirely on whether someone chooses to stay? He grows cautious. He grows dependent. He starts making choices out of fear instead of conviction. Every small argument feels like a threat. Every bit of distance feels like a warning sign. Every hint of uncertainty feels like a full-blown crisis. Without even noticing, he hands over his power piece by piece because power simply cannot survive where fear is calling the shots. This is exactly why the strongest presence in any room usually belongs to the person who could walk away and be fine. Not because he wants to leave, not because he enjoys losing people, but because he understands something most people never figure out. He understands that self-respect has to come before attachment. He understands that peace of mind has to come before approval. He understands that a life ruled by fear can never produce real confidence. A man who's ready to walk away carries himself in a completely different way. He doesn't beg for attention. He doesn't bargain over his own worth. He doesn't spend his days trying to convince other people to pick him. Why not? Because he's already picked himself, and that one shift changes everything. The moment a man truly sees his own value, he stops treating rejection like proof that something's wrong with him. He stops treating distance like proof that he's failed. He stops letting someone else's decision act as the final word on what he's worth. Instead, he comes to understand that not every connection is built to last. Not every person is meant to remain in his life. Not every opportunity is meant to become something permanent. And that's fine, because his sense of self is no longer tied to outcomes he can't control. This creates a rare kind of freedom. Freedom to be genuine. Freedom to be honest. Freedom to hold his standards even when it costs him something. Most people never taste this freedom because they spend their whole lives trying to dodge discomfort. But growth usually starts right where comfort runs out. Being willing to walk away has nothing to do with arrogance. It has nothing to do with ego. It has nothing to do with proving something to anyone. It's about knowing that your future isn't dependent on one person's approval. It's about trusting that your worth stays whole, no matter who stays in your life and who leaves it. That mindset builds a kind of confidence that can't be faked because it's grounded in something real, the reality that you can survive disappointment, you can survive rejection, you can survive loss. And once that truly sinks in, fear loses its hold on you. This is the one thing 99% of men never grasp. They spend years chasing attraction, chasing attention, chasing validation, thinking those things will make them powerful. But real power starts the moment a man stops running after what he's afraid to lose, and instead starts building a life, a purpose, and a self-respect so solid that no one's approval is needed for him to feel whole. That's the quality most men overlook, and it's the one quality that changes absolutely everything.